Sarah Chun had always been told she looked too innocent to be a spy. At 28, with her soft features and gentle voice, she could pass for a graduate student or a librarian. That innocent appearance had served her well during her 3 years as a CIA operative working deep cover in Eastern Europe. Nobody suspected the quiet American translator who worked at the embassy in Prague of being anything more than what she appeared to be. On a cold November morning in 2019, everything changed. Sarah was walking to her usual coffee shop near Wenceslas Square when she noticed the same black sedan that had been following her for the past week. She had reported it to her handler, but they told her to maintain her cover and continue normal activities. The agency believed her identity was still secure. They were wrong. The attack came swift and professional. 3 men in dark coats surrounded her as she entered the narrow alley that led to her apartment building. Before she could react, a cloth soaked in chloroform covered her face. The last thing she remembered was the smell of chemicals and the sound of her phone hitting the cobblestones. Sarah woke up in a windowless concrete room that smelled of dampness and fear. Her hands were zip-tied behind a metal chair, and a single bare bulb cast harsh shadows on the gray walls. A table sat in front of her with various items she recognized from interrogation training: pliers, electrical devices, and syringes filled with unknown substances. The door opened, and a tall man in his 50s entered. He had the weathered face of someone who had spent years in the intelligence business, with cold blue eyes that seemed to see through everything. Behind him came a younger woman with short blonde hair and the kind of athletic build that suggested military training. "Miss Chun," the man said in accented English, or should I say, "Agent Morrison? Yes, we know your real identity." Sarah's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. Her training had prepared her for this moment, though she had hoped it would never come. The key was to appear cooperative while revealing nothing of value. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, making her voice shake slightly. "I'm just a translator. There's been some mistake." The man smiled without warmth. "My name is Viktor Petrov, and this is my associate, Elena Volkov. We represent certain interests that are very curious about American intelligence operations in our region. You've been watching us, and now we're going to have a conversation about what you've learned." Elena stepped forward and placed a photograph on the table. It showed Sarah entering the U.S. Embassy through a side entrance that was supposedly restricted to maintenance staff. The timestamp indicated it was taken just 2 weeks earlier. "Still want to claim you're just a translator?" Elena asked in perfect English with only a slight accent. Sarah studied the photograph, buying time to think. Her mind raced through the protocols she had memorized. Never admit to being an operative. Create confusion about your true role. Make them work for every piece of information. Most importantly, protect your sources and methods at all costs. "I sometimes help with cleaning duties," Sarah said weakly. "They pay extra for weekend work." Victor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You Americans and your cover stories. Always so elaborate, yet so transparent once we know what to look for." He nodded to Elena, who produced another photograph. This one showed Sarah meeting with her handler, David Martinez, at a cafe in the Old Town. They were leaning close together, clearly engaged in an intense conversation. "Romantic meetings with embassy security personnel?" Victor asked mockingly. "How convenient that your boyfriend happens to be CIA station chief for Prague operations." Sarah felt her stomach drop. If they knew about David, her situation was far worse than she had initially thought. The enemy organization had been watching her for months, possibly since she first arrived in Prague. Every contact, every dead drop, every surveillance run might have been compromised. "David and I met at a language exchange group," Sarah said, sticking to a story that had some basis in truth. "We started dating a few months ago. I don't know anything about his work." Elena pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a video. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show Sarah photographing documents in what appeared to be a government building. The timestamp indicated it was taken during a reception at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that Sarah had attended as part of her translator cover. You're quite skilled with that camera pen, Elena observed. Very smooth technique. How long did it take you to master that particular skill? The evidence was overwhelming, and Sarah realized that continuing to deny her role would only waste time and potentially make her captors more aggressive. Her training had covered this scenario. When your cover is completely blown, shift to damage control mode. Okay, Sarah said, allowing her shoulders to slump in apparent defeat. You got me. I work for the embassy, but not in the way you think. I'm what you might call a low-level information gatherer. I attend social functions and report on conversations I overhear. Nothing sophisticated or important. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction. Now we're making progress. Tell us about the information you've gathered. What have you reported to your superiors? This was where Sarah's real test began. She had to provide enough information to seem cooperative while protecting the truly sensitive intelligence she had acquired. Over the past 3 years, she had identified several foreign intelligence operatives, documented their meeting patterns, and helped track money flows that funded terrorist activities across Europe. Mostly gossip, Sarah said, trying to sound embarrassed. Who's sleeping with whom in the diplomatic community? Which officials might be susceptible to bribery? Nothing that would interest serious intelligence professionals like yourselves. Elena's expression suggested she wasn't buying the innocent act. She moved to a cabinet in the corner of the room and retrieved a thick file folder. When she opened it, Sarah could see surveillance photographs, transcripts, and detailed notes about her activities. Our research suggests you're being modest about your capabilities, Elena said, spreading several documents across the table. For instance, you were present at 3 different locations where our operations were subsequently disrupted by Czech authorities. Quite a coincidence. Sarah studied the documents, trying to determine how much her captors actually knew versus what they were guessing. The file was impressive but incomplete. They had tracked her movements but seemed to lack detailed knowledge of her specific intelligence activities. I attend a lot of social events, Sarah said carefully. If something happened at those locations later, it wasn't because of anything I did. Maybe your operations weren't as secure as you thought. Victor stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. Let's try a different approach. We know you've been in contact with someone codenamed Phoenix. This person has been providing information about our financial networks. You're going to tell us Phoenix's real identity. Sarah's blood turned cold. Phoenix was her most valuable source, a mid-level banker who had discovered that his institution was being used to launder money for various criminal enterprises. His information had already led to the arrest of 12 operatives and the freezing of millions of dollars in illicit funds. If Phoenix was exposed, he would certainly be killed, and his family might be targeted as well. Sarah had recruited him personally, spending months building trust and ensuring his safety. Protecting his identity was worth any amount of personal suffering she might endure. I don't know anyone called Phoenix, Sarah said firmly. You're talking about things that are way above my level. Elena produced another photograph, this one showing Sarah sitting on a park bench next to a middle-aged man in an expensive suit. They weren't talking or even looking at each other, but the trained eye could recognize it as a classic dead drop scenario. This photograph was taken 6 weeks ago in Campa Park, Elena said. The man sitting next to you is Martin Novak, a senior loan officer at Československa obchodní banka. Our analysis suggests he left something under that bench for you to retrieve later. Sarah's training kicked in, and she forced herself to remain calm despite the revelation that they had identified Phoenix. The key now was to protect him while finding a way to turn this situation to her advantage. I don't remember that man, Sarah said. I sit in that park sometimes during my lunch break. Lots of people use those benches. Victor moved closer, his presence intimidating in the small room. Miss Chun, we're going to be here for quite some time. The building we're in is completely soundproof, and no one knows you're missing yet. Your disappearance won't be noticed for several days, by which time we'll have extracted everything we need to know. Sarah looked around the room again, noting details she had missed during her initial assessment. The concrete walls showed signs of recent construction, suggesting this was a purpose-built interrogation facility. The door was heavy steel with multiple locks. Most concerning of all, she could see dark stains on the floor that suggested previous occupants hadn't left voluntarily. "I've told you everything I know," Sarah said, putting a slight tremor in her voice. "I'm not a real spy. I'm just someone who got in over her head." Elena consulted the tablet again and showed Sarah a bank statement with several transactions highlighted in red. "These deposits into your personal account correspond exactly with dates when Phoenix provided information to American intelligence. Each payment is exactly $2,000, which suggests a standard fee structure for intelligence purchases." The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. Sarah realized her captors had done extensive preparation for this interrogation. They weren't fishing for information. They already knew most of what they wanted to confirm. The question was whether they were working alone or as part of a larger network. "I do translation work for several clients," Sarah said weakly. "Some of them pay cash for confidential business documents. It's not illegal." Victor sat back down and leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Let me explain something about your situation, Miss Chun. We represent an organization that has been tracking American intelligence activities in this region for several years. Your capture was part of a larger operation designed to roll up an entire network." Sarah's heart sank as the implications became clear. If this was a coordinated effort to expose American operations, then Phoenix wasn't the only source at risk. Her entire 3-year mission might have been compromised from the beginning. "Over the next few hours, we're going to have several conversations," Victor continued. "Each conversation will be more intensive than the last. Your cooperation now will determine how unpleasant those future conversations need to become." Elena moved to the table with the interrogation tools and picked up a small electrical device. "This generates precisely controlled electrical current," she explained matter-of-factly. "The pain is quite intense, but it leaves no permanent marks. Very useful for encouraging honesty." Sarah felt sweat forming on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. Her training had prepared her for the possibility of physical torture, but the reality of facing it was more terrifying than any simulation. "What do you want me to tell you?" Sarah asked, allowing desperation to creep into her voice. "Start with Phoenix," Victor said. "Give us his real name, his address, his family situation, and the specific information he's been providing. Then, we'll discuss your other sources." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to center herself. This was the moment where everything depended on her ability to think clearly under extreme pressure. She needed to buy time, protect her sources, and find some way to turn the tables on her captors. When she opened her eyes, she made a decision that would change everything that followed. "Phoenix isn't a person," Sarah said quietly. "It's a code name for a surveillance operation. You've been looking for the wrong thing this entire time." Victor and Elena exchanged glances, and Sarah could see uncertainty flicker across their faces. Her statement had clearly caught them off guard, which was exactly what she had hoped for. In interrogation situations, creating confusion often provided opportunities that didn't exist when your captors felt completely in control. "Explain," Victor said simply, his voice carrying a new edge of interest. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would determine whether her deception worked or whether she had simply made her situation worse. The key was to provide enough detail to make the lie believable while steering them away from the truth about Phoenix and her other human sources. "Phoenix is a joint operation between the CIA and Czech intelligence," Sarah said, making her voice sound reluctant, as if she was revealing a major secret. "It's a surveillance program that monitors financial transactions at multiple banks across Prague. The man you saw me with in the park wasn't a source. He was a Czech intelligence officer coordinating the operation." Elena frowned and consulted her tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be extensive notes about Sarah's activities. "That doesn't explain the regular payments into your account. Those payments came from the Czech government," Sarah continued, building on her fabricated story. "They pay American operatives who assist with joint operations. The money isn't payment for information. It's compensation for technical assistance." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face carefully. His years of experience in intelligence work had undoubtedly taught him to recognize deception, but Sarah was counting on the fact that her story contained just enough truth to be believable. There really were joint operations between American and Czech intelligence services, and financial surveillance was indeed a common area of cooperation. What kind of technical assistance? Victor asked. I help install surveillance software on bank computer systems, Sarah said, drawing on her genuine knowledge of cybersecurity techniques. The Czechs have good intelligence officers, but they lack some of the advanced technical capabilities that the CIA has developed. I provide training and support for digital surveillance operations. Elena moved to a computer terminal in the corner of the room and began typing rapidly. Sarah assumed she was checking the story against other intelligence they had gathered. The next few minutes would be crucial in determining whether her deception was successful. If what you're saying is true, Victor said slowly, then you wouldn't have access to information about human sources or operational planning. You would only know about the technical aspects of surveillance operations. That's correct, Sarah agreed quickly. I don't know anything about human intelligence gathering. My work is entirely focused on computer systems and digital surveillance. Victor stood up and walked to the far side of the room, apparently deep in thought. Sarah could see him weighing her story against the intelligence his organization had collected. If he accepted her explanation, it would significantly reduce the value they placed on interrogating her. Elena looked up from the computer terminal with a troubled expression. There are records of joint cyber operations between American and Czech services, she said quietly to Victor. The timeline matches what she's describing. Sarah felt a small surge of hope. Her gamble appeared to be paying off, but she knew she couldn't relax yet. Successful deception required maintaining the lie consistently and adding convincing details when questioned. The surveillance operation you call Phoenix has been tracking money flows connected to Russian intelligence activities in Central Europe, Sarah continued, volunteering information to make her story more credible. That's why your organization has been affected by it. The program identifies patterns in financial transactions that suggest covert funding for espionage operations. Victor turned back toward her with renewed interest. What kind of patterns? Sarah drew on her real knowledge of financial intelligence techniques, carefully avoiding any details that might compromise actual operations. Regular transfers between accounts at different banks, always just below the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. Payments to individuals who have no obvious source of income. Wire transfers from countries known to be staging areas for intelligence operations. And this system can identify our financial networks? Elena asked. Some of them, Sarah admitted. The software looks for connections between seemingly unrelated transactions. When it identifies a potential network, Czech intelligence begins physical surveillance of the individuals involved. Victor walked back to the table and sat down heavily. Sarah could see that he was reassessing her value as an intelligence source. If she was truly just a technical support person, she wouldn't have access to information about current operations or future plans. How many banks are participating in this surveillance program? Victor asked. I don't know the exact number, Sarah said, which was truthful. My work focuses on installing and maintaining the software. The Czech intelligence officers handle the analysis and operational decisions. Elena closed her laptop and moved back to the interrogation table. If you're telling the truth about your role, then you wouldn't know about other American intelligence operations in the region. That's correct, Sarah agreed. I only know about Phoenix because I work on the technical aspects. Everything else is compartmentalized above my security clearance level. Victor stood up abruptly and motioned for Elena to follow him to the far corner of the room. They spoke in hushed tones for several minutes, occasionally glancing back at Sarah. She strained to hear their conversation, but could only make out a few words in what sounded like Russian. While they talked, Sarah used the time to assess her situation more carefully. The room had no windows, and she could hear no sound from outside, suggesting they were either in a basement or a very isolated location. The air felt recycled, indicating a ventilation system that might provide clues about the building's size and construction. More importantly, she needed to consider her next moves. If Victor and Elena accepted her story about being a technical support person, they might reduce their security around her or move her to a less secure location. That could provide opportunities for escape or communication with her handlers. Victor returned to the table with a different demeanor. He seemed less aggressive and more businesslike, which suggested that Sarah's deception had at least partially succeeded. Assuming you're telling the truth about your role, Victor said, you could still be valuable to our organization. We're interested in learning more about the technical capabilities of this Phoenix surveillance system. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Victor was essentially offering her a deal: provide technical information in exchange for better treatment. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping to create. What kind of information are you looking for? Sarah asked cautiously. Details about how the surveillance software works, Elena said. What banks it's installed on, how it analyzes transactions, what triggers it uses to identify suspicious activity. Information that would help us understand how to avoid detection. Sarah pretended to consider the request carefully. In reality, she was trying to determine how much false information she could provide without making her deception obvious. If she could convince them that she was cooperating while actually misleading them about the surveillance capabilities, she might be able to protect ongoing operations while gaining their trust. I could provide some of that information, Sarah said slowly. But I need to know what happens to me afterward. If I help you, what guarantee do I have that you'll let me go? Victor and Elena exchanged another look, and Sarah could see them making calculations about her value versus the risk of keeping her alive. This was the most dangerous moment in any interrogation, when captors decided whether a prisoner was more useful alive or dead. Your cooperation will be taken into consideration, Victor said diplomatically. The more helpful you are, the better your situation becomes. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was better than nothing. Sarah nodded, as if accepting the terms, though she had no intention of actually helping them compromise American operations. The Phoenix system is based on advanced pattern recognition algorithms, Sarah began, mixing real technical information with fictional details. It monitors approximately 15 banks across Prague and Brno, looking for transaction patterns that match known intelligence funding methods. Elena took out a notebook and began writing down what Sarah was saying. Victor leaned forward, clearly interested in the technical details. The system triggers an alert when it identifies 3 or more connected transactions within a 30-day period, Sarah continued, making up specific criteria that sounded plausible. It's particularly focused on cash deposits followed by electronic transfers, especially when the amounts are just below 10,000 euros. How does it identify connections between different transactions? Victor asked. Facial recognition software at ATM locations, combined with analysis of transaction timing and amounts, Sarah replied, again mixing real surveillance techniques with fictional specifics. The system also cross-references telephone metadata to identify individuals who are in contact with multiple people involved in suspicious transactions. Sarah was careful to make the surveillance program sound more sophisticated than it actually was, hoping to convince Victor and Elena that their organization's financial activities were under much more extensive observation than was really the case. This explains why several of our operations have been compromised, Elena said grimly. We've been assuming the leaks were coming from human sources, but if there's an automated system tracking our financial activities, the system isn't perfect, Sarah added quickly, sensing an opportunity to sow additional confusion. It generates a lot of false positives, and the check intelligence officers have to manually investigate each alert. But when it does identify a real network, the results are quite comprehensive. Victor stood up and began pacing the small room. This changes our entire assessment of American intelligence capabilities in the region. We've been focusing on traditional human intelligence gathering, but if they have sophisticated technical surveillance in place, there's something else you should know, Sarah said, deciding to take a calculated risk. Phoenix isn't the only program. There are similar surveillance systems in other Central European countries. The Americans are building a comprehensive picture of Russian intelligence activities across the entire region. This was partially true. Sarah knew that the CIA was indeed expanding its technical surveillance capabilities throughout Central and Eastern Europe, though she didn't have specific details about programs in other countries. Elena looked alarmed. How many countries are involved? I don't know exactly, Sarah said honestly. I only work on the Czech operations. But I've heard references to similar programs in Poland, Hungary, and the Baltics. Victor stopped pacing and stared at Sarah intently. You seem to know quite a lot for someone who claims to be just technical support. Sarah felt a moment of panic as she realized she might have overplayed her hand. She needed to backtrack carefully without undermining the credibility of her story. I hear things when I'm working with Czech intelligence officers, Sarah said weakly. They sometimes discuss other operations while I'm installing software or conducting training. I'm not supposed to know about these things, but it's hard not to overhear conversations. Victor seemed to accept this explanation, but Sarah could see that he was becoming more suspicious of her claims about her limited role. She needed to be more careful about how much information she volunteered. What we need now, Elena said, is specific technical details about how to avoid detection by these surveillance systems. Can you provide information about the algorithms the software uses to identify suspicious patterns? This was Sarah's chance to provide misleading information that would actually protect American operations while appearing to cooperate with her captors. She spent the next hour describing fictional technical details about the surveillance software, creating a complex but entirely false picture of how the system operated. By the time she finished her explanation, Victor and Elena believed they understood how to modify their financial activities to avoid detection. In reality, Sarah had provided them with information that would make their transactions more suspicious to the real surveillance systems, not less. This has been very helpful, Victor said finally. We're going to verify some of what you've told us, but assuming it checks out, your situation may improve significantly. Elena gathered up her papers and laptop. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. Tonight, you'll be moved to more comfortable accommodations. As they prepared to leave, Sarah realized that her deception had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. Not only had she protected her human sources and avoided revealing sensitive operational details, but she had actually provided her captors with information that would make them more vulnerable to the very surveillance systems they were trying to avoid. Now, she needed to find a way to escape and report back to her handlers about what she had learned about the enemy organization that had captured her. Sarah's new accommodations were indeed more comfortable than the interrogation room, but they were still clearly designed to prevent escape. She found herself in what appeared to be a converted apartment with a bedroom, small bathroom, and sitting area. The windows were bricked over, and she could hear electronic locks engaging when the door closed behind her guards. Despite the improved conditions, Sarah remained acutely aware that she was still a prisoner whose life depended on maintaining her deception about being merely a technical support person. The false information she had provided about surveillance systems might buy her some time, but eventually Victor and Elena would attempt to verify her claims. She spent her first night analyzing everything she had observed about her captors and their organization. Victor spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to command, and his knowledge of American intelligence operations suggested extensive experience in the field. Elena's questioning technique and technical knowledge indicated specialized training in counterintelligence work. Most concerning was the sophistication of their surveillance of her activities over the past months. The photographs and documents they had shown her represented a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation that would have required significant resources and coordination. This wasn't the work of freelance criminals or a small terrorist cell. It suggested backing by a major intelligence service. The next morning, Elena arrived alone, carrying a tray with breakfast and what appeared to be a new set of documents. She had traded her aggressive interrogation demeanor for a more conversational approach, which Sarah recognized as a classic technique for building rapport with cooperative prisoners. I hope you slept well, Elena said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. Victor is meeting with his superiors today to discuss your situation. Your cooperation yesterday was noted favorably. Sarah accepted the food gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten anything since her capture. The breakfast was simple but decent: bread, cheese, coffee, and fruit. The normalcy of the meal contrasted sharply with the surreal nature of her situation. I'm curious about something, Elena continued, settling into a chair across from Sarah. Your background check shows you have a degree in computer science from MIT, but your embassy file lists you as a language specialist. How did someone with your technical qualifications end up working as a translator? The question was clearly designed to test Sarah's cover story, but it also provided an opportunity to strengthen her deception. Sarah had indeed studied computer science, though her degree was from the University of Virginia, not MIT. Elena's incorrect information suggested their intelligence on her background wasn't complete. I studied computer science because my parents wanted me to have practical skills, Sarah said, sticking close to the truth. But I was always more interested in languages and international relations. After graduation, I took a job with the State Department that let me combine both interests. And that led to your current work with surveillance systems? Eventually, Sarah agreed. The embassy needed someone who could work with both American and Czech technical teams. My language skills made me a natural choice for liaison work. Elena nodded and opened the folder she had brought with her. We've been reviewing your claims about the Phoenix surveillance program. Some of what you told us yesterday has been confirmed by other sources. Sarah felt a mix of relief and concern. Relief because it suggested her deception was holding up under scrutiny, but concern because it meant Victor and Elena had additional sources of information that she wasn't aware of. There's something else we'd like to discuss, Elena continued. Our organization is interested in developing counter-surveillance capabilities. If you were willing to provide more detailed assistance, it could significantly improve your situation. This was the opening Sarah had been hoping for. If she could convince them to trust her with more information about their organization, she might be able to learn enough to compromise their entire operation once she escaped or was rescued. What kind of assistance are you looking for? Sarah asked carefully. We'd like you to help us develop software that could detect and avoid the kind of surveillance you described. In exchange, you would be given more freedom and eventually released when the project is complete. Sarah pretended to consider the offer while her mind raced through the implications. They were essentially asking her to help them build tools that would make them invisible to American surveillance. If she appeared too eager to help, they might become suspicious, but if she refused, they might decide she was no longer useful. That would be a significant undertaking, Sarah said slowly. I need access to technical resources and probably other specialists. It's not the kind of work I could do alone. We have technical capabilities you might find surprising, Elena said with a slight smile. This facility has computers, programming environments, and networking capabilities that would meet your requirements. Sarah filed this information away as potentially valuable intelligence about their organization's resources. A group with sophisticated computer facilities and technical specialists was likely much larger and better funded than she had initially assumed. I'd also need some guarantee that I would actually be released when the work is finished, Sarah continued. Right now, I only have your word that cooperation will improve my situation. Elena leaned forward, her expression becoming more serious. Let me be frank with you, Sarah. Your government doesn't know where you are, and they're not currently looking for you in the right places. Your survival depends entirely on your value to our organization. The more useful you make yourself, the longer you live. The threat was delivered matter-of-factly, but Sarah could hear the sincerity behind it. She was completely dependent on maintaining her captor's belief that she was worth more alive than dead. Understand, Sarah said quietly. What would you need me to do first? Elena opened her folder and pulled out several technical documents. These are specifications for the surveillance software used by Czech intelligence. We'd like you to review them and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Sarah examined the documents, trying not to show her surprise at their detailed and apparently accurate information about Czech surveillance capabilities. Either Victor and Elena's organization had penetrated Czech intelligence services, or they had access to inside information from another source. "This is very detailed," Sarah said, buying time to think. "Where did you obtain these specifications?" "That's not your concern," Elena replied curtly. "Your job is to analyze the technical information and provide recommendations." Sarah spent the next several hours reviewing the documents, while Elena worked on a laptop in the corner of the room. The technical specifications were indeed genuine, which confirmed that her captors had access to highly classified information about Czech intelligence operations. More troubling was the realization that some of the surveillance techniques described in the documents were ones that Sarah had actually helped implement during her time in Prague. If Victor and Elena's organization knew about these specific programs, they might also know about her real role in developing them. "I can identify several potential vulnerabilities," Sarah said finally, deciding to provide a mixture of genuine insights and misleading information. "But I need to understand more about how your organization operates in order to develop effective countermeasures." Elena looked up from her laptop with interest. "What kind of information do you need?" "Basic operational patterns," Sarah said. "How do you typically transfer money? What communication methods do you use? How often do you change locations? The more I understand about your actual activities, the better I can tailor countermeasures to protect them." This was a calculated risk. Sarah was essentially asking for information about her captors' operations, which they might be reluctant to provide. But if she could frame her request as necessary for technical development, they might be willing to share details that would be valuable intelligence. Elena closed her laptop and studied Sarah carefully. "Why would you need operational details to develop technical countermeasures?" "Because surveillance systems are designed to detect specific behavior patterns," Sarah explained, drawing on her real knowledge of intelligence analysis. "If I don't know what patterns you're trying to hide, I can't develop software to hide them effectively." Elena seemed to accept this logic, but she clearly wanted to consult with Victor before providing sensitive operational information. "I'll discuss your requirements with my colleagues. In the meantime, continue analyzing those documents and prepare a preliminary report on the vulnerabilities you've identified." After Elena left, Sarah was alone for the first time since her capture. She used the opportunity to conduct a more thorough examination of her quarters, looking for potential escape routes or communication methods. The room was more secure than it initially appeared. The walls were reinforced concrete, and she could detect the faint hum of electronic surveillance equipment. The bathroom had no windows, and the ventilation system was too small for human passage. More concerning was her growing realization that her captor's organization was far more sophisticated than she had initially assumed. Their detailed knowledge of American and Czech operations, combined with their technical resources and operational security, suggested the backing of a major intelligence service. That evening, Victor returned with Elena and a third person Sarah hadn't seen before. The newcomer was a woman in her 40s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of penetrating gaze that suggested extensive experience in intelligence work. "Sarah," Victor said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Katerina Kozlov. She will be overseeing the technical aspects of your cooperation with our organization." Dr. Kozlov studied Sarah with obvious professional interest. "I've reviewed your academic record and your reported work with surveillance systems. Your qualifications are impressive, but I have some questions about your claimed role in the Phoenix program." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. Dr. Kozlov's tone suggested the kind of detailed, technical questioning that might expose the flaws in her cover story. "What kind of questions?" Sarah asked carefully. "The surveillance system you described yesterday uses algorithms that are quite advanced," Dr. Kozlov said. "The pattern recognition techniques you mentioned would require expertise in machine learning and artificial intelligence. That level of knowledge seems inconsistent with your claimed role as technical support." Sarah realized she had made her fictional surveillance system too sophisticated. Someone with Dr. Kozlov's obvious technical background would recognize the discrepancy between Sarah's supposed role and the complexity of the system she was describing. "I learned those techniques on the job," Sarah said weakly. The Czech intelligence officers provided training in advanced analysis methods. Dr. Kozlov smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "I think you've been less than honest about your actual role in American intelligence operations. Tomorrow, we're going to have a much more detailed conversation about your real qualifications and responsibilities." As the three left her quarters for the night, Sarah realized that her deception was beginning to unravel. Dr. Kozlov's arrival suggested that her captors were becoming suspicious of her claims and were bringing in additional expertise to evaluate her story. Sarah spent a sleepless night considering her options. She could continue trying to maintain her cover as a technical support person, but Dr. Kozlov's questioning would likely expose the inconsistencies in her story. Alternatively, she could admit to a higher level of involvement in intelligence operations while still protecting her most sensitive sources and methods. The decision she made would determine whether she maintained her captors' trust or whether they decided she was too dangerous to keep alive. Either way, Sarah was running out of time to find a way to escape and report back to her handlers about the sophisticated intelligence operation that had captured her. The next morning brought an entirely different dynamic to Sarah's situation. Instead of the careful interrogation session she had grown accustomed to, Dr. Kozlov arrived with a laptop computer, several technical manuals, and what appeared to be testing materials. "Good morning, Sarah," Dr. Kozlov said with professional politeness. "Today we're going to conduct a practical evaluation of your technical capabilities. I've prepared several exercises that will help us understand exactly what role you've been playing in American intelligence operations." Sarah recognized this as a sophisticated approach to exposing her deception. Rather than relying solely on questioning, Dr. Kozlov intended to test her actual knowledge and skills. If Sarah really was just a technical support person, her performance on these tests would reflect that limited role. "What kind of exercises?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dr. Kozlov opened the laptop and showed Sarah a screen displaying what appeared to be surveillance software interface. "This is a simplified version of the kind of financial monitoring system you described. I'd like you to demonstrate how you would configure it to detect the specific transaction patterns you mentioned yesterday." Sarah studied the interface, immediately recognizing that it was far more sophisticated than anything she had actually worked with during her time in Prague. Dr. Kozlov was testing whether Sarah could actually perform the technical tasks she claimed to be familiar with. "This looks more advanced than the systems I usually work with," Sarah said carefully, buying time to think. "The interface is different from what I'm used to." "Software interfaces vary," Dr. Kozlov replied neutrally, "but the underlying principles remain the same. Someone with your supposed experience should be able to adapt quickly." Sarah realized she was facing a moment of truth. She could either admit that her technical knowledge was limited and risk exposing her deception about her role, or she could attempt to demonstrate capabilities that might reveal more about her actual intelligence training than she wanted to show. She chose a middle path, drawing on her real computer science background while being careful not to display the kind of advanced skills that would suggest specialized intelligence training. "I can work with this," Sarah said, "but I'll need a few minutes to familiarize myself with the interface." Over the next hour, Sarah navigated through the software with deliberate caution, making the kinds of mistakes that someone with limited experience might make while still demonstrating enough competence to maintain her cover story. It was a delicate balancing act that required constant attention to how much skill she revealed. Dr. Kozlov observed silently, occasionally taking notes on a tablet. Her expression remained neutral, making it impossible for Sarah to gauge whether her performance was convincing or whether she was exposing herself as a fraud. "Interesting," Dr. Kozlov said finally. "Your approach to configuring the surveillance parameters shows familiarity with the concepts, but your technique suggests you've learned these skills recently rather than through extensive experience." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Dr. Kozlov had identified exactly what Sarah had been trying to hide, that her knowledge came from intelligence, training rather than practical field experience. "I told you I learned these techniques on the job," Sarah said weakly. I'm still developing my expertise. Perhaps, Dr. Kozlov replied. Let's try a different exercise. She opened a new program that displayed what appeared to be intercepted communications data. This is the kind of information that surveillance systems generate. I'd like you to analyze these communications patterns and identify which ones might indicate intelligence activities. Sarah examined the data, recognizing immediately that it represented real intercepted communications rather than training exercises. The patterns, timing, and encryption techniques were consistent with professional intelligence operations. More concerning was her growing realization that some of the communications data looked familiar. Several of the encryption signatures matched techniques used by the CIA station in Prague, suggesting that Dr. Kozlov's organization had successfully intercepted American intelligence communications. These appear to be encrypted communications, Sarah said, stating the obvious while trying to determine how much she should reveal about her ability to analyze the data. Yes, but encryption patterns themselves can provide valuable intelligence, Dr. Kozlov explained. Even without breaking the encryption, you can learn about operational patterns, timing, and communication networks. Sarah recognized this as a genuine lesson in intelligence analysis techniques, which suggested that Dr. Kozlov was either testing Sarah's existing knowledge or preparing to train her in more advanced methods. I can see some patterns in the timing, Sarah said carefully, but this kind of analysis is beyond my current skill level. Dr. Kozlov made another note on her tablet. Your honesty is refreshing, but it raises questions about your claimed role in the Phoenix surveillance program. The systems you described would require analysts with much more advanced capabilities. Sarah realized that her attempts to downplay her skills were creating new problems. If she appeared too inexperienced to have worked on the surveillance program she had described, it would expose her deception from a different angle. I worked as part of a team, Sarah said, trying to find a middle ground. Other people handled the advanced analysis while I focused on installation and basic configuration. That's more consistent with your demonstrated abilities, Dr. Kozlov agreed. But it also means you would have limited knowledge about how the systems actually work in practice. Before Sarah could respond, Victor entered the room with an expression that suggested significant developments had occurred while she was being tested. We need to talk, Victor said to Dr. Kozlov, motioning toward the door. Something has come up that changes our assessment of the situation. Dr. Kozlov closed her laptop and followed Victor out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The testing session had revealed the fundamental weakness in her deception. She couldn't simultaneously claim to be a technical expert and demonstrate limited technical abilities. When Victor and Dr. Kozlov returned 20 minutes later, their demeanor had changed significantly. They appeared more tense and urgent than during previous conversations. Sarah, Victor said, settling into his chair with obvious concern, we've received information that suggests your disappearance has been noticed sooner than we expected. American intelligence services are actively searching for you. Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. If the CIA was looking for her, there was a chance of rescue, but it also meant her captors might decide she was too dangerous to keep alive. That's not surprising, Sarah said, trying to appear unconcerned. Even technical support personnel have regular check-in requirements. When I miss a scheduled contact, security protocols require search. Dr. Kozlov consulted her tablet before responding. The search appears to be more extensive than would be typical for a missing translator. Multiple intelligence agencies are involved, and they're using resources that suggest you're considered a high-priority asset. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the implications. If multiple agencies were involved in searching for her, it suggested that her real identity and importance had been discovered. Her cover as a low-level technical support person was becoming impossible to maintain. I don't know why they would consider me high priority, Sarah said weakly. Maybe they're concerned about what I might reveal about joint operations with Czech intelligence. Victor stood up and began pacing, clearly agitated by this development. The scale of the search suggests they consider you much more valuable than a technical support person would normally be. Either you're lying about your role, or you have access to more sensitive information than you've admitted. This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. Her captors were being forced to reassess her value, and she needed to make a decision about how to respond. She could continue trying to maintain her deception, admit to a higher level of involvement, or attempt to use the situation to her advantage. "There's something I haven't told you," Sarah said, making a calculated decision to reveal some truth while still protecting her most sensitive secrets. "My role in technical support gave me access to information about other American intelligence operations in the region. That might explain why they're treating my disappearance as a security breach." Dr. Kozlov leaned forward with renewed interest. "What kind of information?" "Details about intelligence gathering operations in other countries," Sarah said, drawing on her general knowledge while avoiding specifics that could compromise actual operations. "The surveillance programs I work on are connected to similar efforts throughout Central and Eastern Europe. My disappearance could expose the entire network." Victor stopped pacing and stared at Sarah intently. "Are you saying you have knowledge of American intelligence operations beyond what you've already told us?" "Some," Sarah admitted carefully, "but most of it is technical information about computer systems and surveillance methods. I don't know details about human sources or specific operations." This was a carefully crafted partial truth. Sarah did indeed have knowledge of operations in other countries, but her access came from her role as an operational intelligence officer, not from technical support work. Dr. Kozlov opened her laptop again and pulled up what appeared to be a map of Central Europe with various locations marked. "Can you identify which countries have surveillance programs similar to Phoenix?" Sarah studied the map, recognizing several locations where she knew American intelligence operations were active. She decided to provide a mixture of accurate and inaccurate information, hoping to mislead her captors while appearing cooperative. "Poland definitely has a similar program," Sarah said truthfully. "Hungary and Romania have smaller-scale operations. I think there are also programs in the Baltic states, but I don't know details about those." Victor and Dr. Kozlov exchanged glances that suggested this information was consistent with what they already knew from other sources. "What about operational security for these programs?" Dr. Kozlov asked. "How do American intelligence services protect their surveillance operations from detection?" This question offered Sarah an opportunity to provide misleading information that might actually compromise her captor's security while appearing to help them. "They use compartmentalization," Sarah said, drawing on genuine security principles while adding fictional details. "Each surveillance program operates independently, with different communication protocols and security procedures. The systems are designed so that compromise of one operation doesn't expose the others. But someone with your level of access would know about multiple operations," Victor pointed out. "Only the technical aspects," Sarah replied. "I know about the computer systems and how they're connected, but I don't have access to operational details or human intelligence information." Dr. Kozlov made several notes on her tablet before looking up with a more calculating expression. "Your knowledge of these technical systems could be extremely valuable to our organization. We're prepared to make you a much more attractive offer for your cooperation." Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. A better offer might provide opportunities to gather intelligence about her captor's organization, but it would also mean deeper involvement in activities that could compromise American operations. "What kind of offer?" Sarah asked. "Complete freedom in exchange for detailed technical assistance with our counter-surveillance efforts," Victor said. "You would work with our technical team to develop methods for avoiding detection by the surveillance programs you described. When the project is complete, you would be released with enough money to disappear permanently." Sarah recognized this as both an opportunity and a trap. If she accepted, she would gain access to information about her captor's organization and technical capabilities, but she would also be expected to provide genuine assistance that could harm American intelligence operations. "I'd need guarantees about my safety and eventual release," Sarah said, playing for time while considering her options. "Those can be arranged," Dr. Kozlov said, "but we'd also need guarantees from you. Any attempt to sabotage our work or communicate with your former colleagues would result in immediate termination." Sarah nodded, as if considering the offer seriously, while her mind raced through the possibilities. If she could maintain the deception long enough to learn about her captor's organization, she might be able to provide valuable intelligence to the CIA, even if she never escaped. The question was whether she could convincingly pretend to betray her country while actually working to protect American interests. It would require walking an even more dangerous line than she had already been navigating, but it might be her only chance to turn the tables on the sophisticated intelligence operation that had captured her. Sarah spent the night carefully considering Victor and Dr. Kozlov's offer. Agreeing to help them develop counter-surveillance capabilities was dangerous, but it also presented an unprecedented opportunity to gather intelligence about their organization from the inside. If she could maintain her deception while appearing to cooperate, she might be able to learn enough to compromise their entire network. The next morning, she told Victor she was willing to accept their offer, with certain conditions about her working environment and eventual release. To her surprise, they agreed to most of her requests, including access to technical resources and regular meetings with their intelligence team. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself in the unique position of being a double agent who was pretending to be a technical support person who was pretending to betray her country. The complexity of maintaining multiple layers of deception was mentally exhausting, but it provided access to information she never could have obtained through traditional intelligence gathering. Dr. Kozlov introduced her to a team of highly skilled technicians who were working on various counterintelligence projects. Sarah quickly realized that their organization was much larger and more sophisticated than she had initially understood. They had resources that rivaled those of major intelligence services, and their knowledge of American operations was disturbingly comprehensive. Our primary objective, Dr. Kozlov explained during one of their technical meetings, is to develop capabilities that will allow our operatives to move money and communicate without detection by Western intelligence services. Your knowledge of surveillance systems will help us identify vulnerabilities we can exploit. Sarah worked diligently on the project, providing enough genuine assistance to maintain her captor's trust while carefully sabotaging critical aspects of their counter-surveillance efforts. She introduced subtle flaws into the software they were developing, flaws that would actually make their communications more detectable rather than less. The most valuable intelligence Sarah gathered came from overhearing conversations between Victor and other senior members of the organization. From these discussions, she learned that they were part of a Russian intelligence operation called Shadow Network that had been operating in Central Europe for over 5 years. Shadow Network's primary mission was to compromise Western intelligence operations and recruit assets within NATO intelligence services. They had successfully penetrated several European intelligence agencies and were working to build a comprehensive picture of American and European intelligence capabilities throughout the region. More disturbing was Sarah's discovery that Shadow Network had been tracking her activities for over a year before her capture. They had identified her as a CIA operative early in her assignment, but had allowed her to continue operating while they gathered intelligence about American methods and sources. "Your surveillance program has been quite useful to us," Victor told her during one of their regular meetings. "By monitoring your activities and communications, we've learned a great deal about how American intelligence operates in this environment." Sarah realized with growing horror that her entire mission in Prague had been compromised from the beginning. Every source she had recruited, every piece of intelligence she had gathered, every operation she had supported might have been known to the Russians. The knowledge was devastating, but it also provided her with crucial intelligence about the scope and methods of Russian operations in the region. If she could find a way to escape and report what she had learned, it could help the CIA understand how extensively their operations had been compromised. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. Dr. Kozlov's technical team was preparing to test the counter-surveillance software they had been developing, and they needed to conduct field trials using actual intelligence communications networks. Sarah convinced them that she needed access to live surveillance data to properly calibrate the countermeasures. This required moving her to a facility with more sophisticated technical capabilities, including secure communications equipment that could intercept and analyze intelligence transmissions in real time. The new location was less secure than her previous quarters, and Sarah began planning her escape. The breakthrough came when she discovered that the facility's secure communications system included emergency protocols that would automatically transmit distress signals to various intelligence agencies if certain code phrases were entered. Sarah realized that if she could access the system during one of their testing sessions, she might be able to send a message to the CIA revealing her location and the intelligence she had gathered. The risk was enormous. If her captors discovered what she was attempting, they would certainly kill her. But the intelligence she had acquired about Shadow Network was too important to lose, even if it meant sacrificing her life to ensure the information reached the CIA. During a late-night testing session, Sarah saw her chance. While Dr. Kozlov's team was focused on analyzing intercepted communications, Sarah accessed the emergency protocol system and transmitted a coded message containing her location and key intelligence about Shadow Network's operations. The message was disguised as routine system diagnostic data, but it contained enough information for CIA analysts to recognize it as a distress signal and begin planning a rescue operation. 3 days later, as Sarah was working with the technical team on what they believed was a breakthrough in counter-surveillance capabilities, the facility was suddenly surrounded by Czech special forces working in coordination with CIA operatives. The rescue operation was swift and professional. Victor, Dr. Kozlov, and most of their team were captured alive, along with extensive documentation about Shadow Network's operations throughout Central Europe. Sarah's debriefing with CIA analysts lasted for weeks as she provided detailed intelligence about everything she had learned during her captivity. The information she provided led to the identification and arrest of over 30 Russian intelligence operatives and the exposure of Shadow Network's infiltration of several European intelligence services. Most significantly, Sarah's intelligence revealed that the Russians had been using compromised intelligence operations to feed false information back to Western services, creating a sophisticated disinformation campaign that had influenced policy decisions in Washington and European capitals. Your work during captivity may have prevented a significant intelligence disaster, Sarah's handler told her during one of their debriefing sessions. If Shadow Network had succeeded in implementing their counter-surveillance capabilities, they could have operated undetected for years while feeding us false information. The investigation that followed Sarah's rescue revealed the full scope of Russian intelligence activities in Central Europe and led to a comprehensive review of CIA operational security procedures. Several long-running operations had to be terminated when it became clear they had been compromised, but the intelligence Sarah provided allowed the CIA to understand exactly what the Russians knew and how they had obtained the information. Victor and Dr. Kozlov, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of lengthy prison sentences, agreed to cooperate with American intelligence in exchange for reduced sentences. Their debriefing provided additional details about Russian intelligence operations throughout Europe and helped the CIA identify other Shadow Network cells that were still operating. Sarah's experience had lasting effects on how the CIA approached operations in contested environments. The sophisticated surveillance and disinformation techniques used by Shadow Network represented a new level of threat that required fundamental changes in operational security and intelligence analysis. For Sarah personally, the mission marked the end of her career as an undercover operative. Her exposure to Shadow Network made it impossible for her to work in deep cover again, but her experience with double agent operations made her valuable as a trainer and analyst. She was assigned to the CIA's Counterintelligence Center, where she helped develop new techniques for detecting and countering sophisticated foreign intelligence operations. Her insights into how adversaries could exploit surveillance technologies and use captured operatives as double agents became essential components of CIA training programs. The Phoenix surveillance program that had been central to Sarah's cover story was eventually implemented for real, using techniques she had learned during her captivity to detect and counter foreign intelligence activities. The irony was not lost on Sarah that her fictional descriptions of surveillance capabilities had become the blueprint for actual operations. Years later, as she briefed new CIA operatives on the dangers of sophisticated adversary operations, Sarah would reflect on how her apparent capture and interrogation had actually provided the intelligence needed to protect American interests throughout Central Europe. The mission that had seemed like a failure when she was captured in that Prague alley had ultimately become one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in CIA history. By appearing to crack under interrogation while actually maintaining her cover and gathering crucial intelligence, Sarah had turned the tables on an enemy operation that threatened American intelligence capabilities throughout the region. The Shadow Network case became a textbook example of how experienced operatives could use even the most dangerous situations to gather intelligence and protect national security interests. Sarah's ability to maintain multiple layers of deception while appearing to cooperate with her captors had prevented a significant intelligence disaster and provided the information needed to roll up an entire enemy network. For the Russian intelligence services, the loss of Shadow Network represented a major setback in their efforts to penetrate and compromise Western intelligence operations. The network they had spent years building throughout Central Europe was destroyed in a matter of weeks, and the exposure of their methods made it much harder to conduct similar operations in the future. Sarah's story became legendary within the intelligence community, though the full details remained classified for many years. Her experience demonstrated that even when facing sophisticated adversaries with extensive resources, a skilled operative could find ways to turn apparent defeat into strategic victory. The young woman who had been captured while walking to a coffee shop in Prague had proven that sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy intelligence operation was to appear to join it while secretly working to destroy it from within. Her courage and skill had protected American interests and helped ensure the security of intelligence operations throughout one of the world's most contested regions.